Hello and welcome to Swanns Way, starting at page 256. Like everything else that was part of Odette's environment and no more, in some sense, than a means by which he could see her, talk to her, he enjoyed the company of the Verdurins. There, because at the center of all the amusements, meals, music, games, costume suppers, excursions into the country, theatre parties, even the rare grand soirees for the boors, was the presence of Odette, the sight of Odette, conversation with Odette, of which the Verdurins gave to Swann by inviting him the inestimable gift. He was happier among the little clan than anywhere else, and sought to attribute real merits to it, for by doing so he could imagine that, out of preference, he would associate it with it for all his life. For, since he did not dare say to himself, afraid that he would not believe it, that he would always love Odette, at least by supposing that he would always associate with the Verdurins a proposition that a priori raised fewer objections of principle on the part of his intelligence, he could see himself in the future continuing to meet Odette every evening. This did not, perhaps, quite amount to the same thing as always loving her, but for the moment, while he loved her, to believe that he would not stop seeing her one day was all that he asked. What a charming place, he would say to himself, how fundamentally real their life is, how much more intelligent, more artistic they are than high society people. How sincere, despite some rather absurd little exaggerations, is Madame Verdurin's love of paintings, music. What a passion she has for works of art, and how she longs to please artists. This notion she has formed of society people is not accurate, but then again, society's notion of artistic circles is even more false. Perhaps I have no very great intellectual needs to satisfy in conversation, but I'm perfectly happy with Cottard, though he does make inept puns. As for the painter, his pretentiousness may be unpleasant when he's trying to surprise people, but on the other hand, he has one of the finest minds I've ever known. And also, most of all, you feel free there, you do what you like, without feeling constrained, without standing on ceremony. What a quantity of good humor is expected every day in that drawing-room! Decidedly, apart from a few rare exceptions, I will never go anywhere else. More and more, that is where I will find my companionship and live my life. And since the qualities he believed to be intrinsic to the Verdurins were merely the reflection of the pleasures he enjoyed in their house because of his love for Odette, those qualities became more serious, more profound, more vital along with those pleasures. Because Madame Verdurin sometimes gave Swann the only thing that could constitute happiness for him. Because on a certain evening, when he felt anxious because Odette had been talking to one guest more than another, and when, irritated at her, he did not want to take the initiative of asking her if she would return home with him, Madame Verdurin brought him peace and joy by saying spontaneously, "Odette, will you take Monsieur Swann home? Won't you?" Because when summer was approaching, and he had at first wondered uneasily if Odette would be going away without him, if he could continue to see her every day, Madame Verdurin invited them both to spend it at her home in the country. Swann, unconsciously allowing gratitude and self-interest to infiltrate into his intelligence and influence his ideas, went so far as to proclaim that Madame Verdurin was the soul of high-mindedness. Apropos of a few delight or eminent people whom, of his old classmates from l'École du Louvre, might mention to him, he would respond, "I prefer the Verdurins 100 times over," and with solemnity that was new to him, "They are magnanimous people, and magnanimity is, fundamentally, the only thing that matters and gives us distinction here on earth. You know, there are only two classes of people, the magnanimous ones and all the rest, and when you reach my age you have to choose. You decide once and for all who you intend to like and whom you intend to despise. Stick with the ones you like, and so as to make up for the time you wasted with the others. Don't leave them again until you die. Well, he added with a slight emotion, with that slight emotion you feel when, even without fully realizing it, you say something not because it is true, but because you enjoy saying it, and you listen to it in your own voice as if it came from somewhere other than from yourself. My fate is settled. I have chosen to like only magnanimous hearts, and to live from now on only in magnanimity. You ask me if Madame Verdurin is truly intelligent. I assure you that she has given me proof of a nobility of heart, of a loftiness of soul, which, you know, can't be attained without equal loftiness of mind. Certainly she has a profound intelligence where art's concerned, but perhaps this is not her most admirable quality. And every small, ingenuously, exquisitely good action that she has performed for me, every genial attention, every gesture of sublime familiarity, reveals a more profound understanding of life than any philosophical treatise. Yet he could have said to himself that there were old friends of his parents, just as simple as the Verdurins, friends of his youth as smitten with art, that he knew other great-hearted people, and that nevertheless, now that he had opted for simplicity, the arts, and magnanimity, he never saw them any more. But these people did not know Odette, and if they had known her, would never have thought of bringing the two of them together. And so there was probably not, in the whole Verdurin circle, a single faithful partisan who liked them or thought he liked them as much as did Swann. And yet, when Monsieur Verdurin had said he did not much care for Swann, he was only expressing his own thoughts. He was not only expressing his own thoughts, but also guessing his wife's. Doubtless Swann's affection for Odette was too private, and he neglected to make Madame Verdurin his daily confidant concerning it. Doubtless the very discretion with which he had made use of the Verdurins' hospitality, often refraining from coming to dinner for a reason that they did not suspect, and in place of which they saw a desire not to turn down an invitation to the home of some bores. Doubtless, too, and despite all the precautions he had taken to hide it from them, their gradual discovery of his brilliant position in society, all fed their irritation with him. But the deeper reason for it was different. It was that they had very quickly sensed in him a reserved, impenetrable space where he continued to profess silently to himself that the Princess de Ségon was not grotesque, and that Cottard's jokes were not funny. In the end, and even though he never deviated from his affability and never rebelled against their dogmas, they sensed too an impossibility of imposing them on him, on wholly converting him to them, the likes of which they had never encountered in anyone before. They would have forgiven him for associations with bores, to whom, for that matter, in his heart of hearts, he preferred the Verdurins, and the whole of the little clan 1,000 times over, if he had consented, as a good example, to renounce them in the presence of the faithful. But this was an abjuration they understood could not be wrung from him. How different from a newcomer when Odette had asked them to invite, though she had not met him more than a few times, and in whom they invested many hopes, the Comte de Forcheville. It turned out that, in fact, he was Saniette's brother-in-law, which filled the faithful with surprise. The old architect's manners were so humble that they had always thought he was from a social rank inferior to theirs, and did not expect to learn that he belonged to a world that was rich and relatively aristocratic. True, Forcheville was grossly snobbish, whereas Swann was not. True, he did not even dream of placing the circle of Verderins above all others, as Swann did. But he did not have the natural delicacy that stopped Swann from joining in with the two manifestly false criticisms that Madame Verdurin leveled against the people he knew. As for the vulgar and pretentious triads the painter launched into on certain days, as for the travelling salesman jokes that Cottard ventured, for which Swann, whom like both men could easily find excuses without having the heart or the hypocrisy to applaud them, for Forcheville, by contrast, was of an intellectual calibre that allowed him to be dumbfounded, awestruck by the first, though he did not understand them, and to delight in the second. And in fact, the first dinner at the Verderins at which Forcheville was present exposed all these differences, brought out his qualities, and precipitated Swann's fall from grace. At this dinner there was, besides the regulars, a professor from the Sorbonne, Rochelle, who had met Monsieur and Madame Verdurin at the spa, and, if his duties at the university and his scholarly work had not given him very few hours of freedom, would willingly have come to their house often, for he had that curiosity, that excessive interest in life, which, when combined with a degree of skepticism concerning the object of their studies, gives certain intelligent men in any profession, doctors who did not believe in medicine, school-teachers who did not believe in Latin compositions, a reputation for having minds that are broad, brilliant, and even superior. At Madame Verderin's he made a point of seeking his illustrations in whatever was most up-to-date, when he spoke of philosophy and history, principally because he thought such subjects were only a preparation for real life, and he imagined he would find the little plan putting into practice what he had known before now only from books, and then perhaps because, having had installed in him in the past, and having preserved without knowing it a respect for certain subjects, he believed he was casting off his academic tendencies by taking liberties with them, which, on the contrary, appeared such to him only because he had remained in academia. At the very beginning of the meal, when Monsieur de Forcheville placed to the right of Madame Verdurin, who had gone to great trouble over her appearance so as to please the newcomer, said to her, "Quite original, that white dress." The doctor, who had been steadily observing him, so curious was he to find out what sort of man et deux, as he termed it, would be, and who was looking for a chance of attracting his attention and entering into closer contact with him, seized on the word blanche, and without lifting his nose from his plate, said, "Blanche, Blanche de Castille," then, without moving his head, cast his eyes furtively to the right and left with an uncertain smiling look, whereas Swann, with his painful and usual attempt at a smile, revealed how stupid he thought the pun was. Forcheville had shown both that he relished its subtlety and that he had good manners, by containing within judicious limits a gaiety whose frankness had charmed Madame Verdurin. "What do you make of our man of science?" she had asked Forcheville. "It's impossible to have even 2 minutes of serious conversation with him. Is that the sort of thing you say to them at your hospital? She had added, turning to the doctor. It must be rather lively there, if that's the case. I see I'll have to get them to admit me a patient. I think I heard the doctor talking about that old termagant, Blanche de Castille, if I dare express myself that way. Am I correct, Madame? Brichot asked Madame Verdurin, who, swooning with laughter, her eyes shut, plunged her face into her hands, from which stifled cries escaped. My God, Madame, I would not want to alarm whatever respectful souls there may be at this table, sub rosa. And I realize that our ineffable republic, Athenia, as it is, how very much so, might pay homage to that obscurantist Capuchin lady as the very first truly authoritarian police perfect. Yes, indeed, my dear host, yes, indeed, he went on in his sonorous voice, detaching each syllable in response to an objection of Monsieur Verdurin's. The Chronique de Saint-Denis, whose facts are incontestably reliable, leaves no doubt about this. No better choice of patron could have been made by a secularized poetryette than that mother of a saint to whom, incidentally, she gave a pretty rough time, as we are told by Sugar and other St. Bernards. For with her everyone got hauled over the coals. Who is this gentleman? Forcheville asked Madame Verdurin. He seems very first-rate. What, you haven't heard of the famous Brichot? Why, he's celebrated all over Europe. Oh, so that's Brichot, cried Forcheville. It's spelled incorrectly there. So that's Brichot, cried Forcheville, who had not heard the name clearly. You must tell me all about him, he added, staring wide-eyed at the famous man. It's always interesting to have dinner with a prominent person, but I must say, you certainly give your guest some choice dining mates. No one's likely to get bored in your house. Oh, you know, the most important thing, Madame Verdurin said, modestly, is that they know they can trust us. They can talk about whatever they like. The conversation is often running. For instance, now, take Brichot. This is nothing. I've seen him, you know, when he's been absolutely dazzling here in my house, and feel you ought to go down on your knees before him. Well now, at other people's houses he's not the same man. He hasn't a scrap of wit. You have to force the words out of him. He's actually boring. How odd, said Forcheville, surprised. A wit like Brichot's would have been considered pure stupidity by the people amongst whom Swann had spent his youth, even though it might be compatible with real intelligence. And the professor's intelligence, vigorous and well-nourished, probably would have been envied by many of the society people whom Swann considered witty. But those people had inculcated him so thoroughly with their own likes and dislikes, at least concerning anything to do with society life, including even that annexed part of it which should, instead, belong to the domain of intelligence, namely conversation, that Swann could only find Brichot's jokes pedantic, vulgar, and sickeningly coarse. Then, too, being so accustomed to good manners, he was shocked by the rough military tone affected each time he addressed anyone. but a jingoistic academic. Finally, perhaps he had lost some of his indulgence, that evening in particular, seeing the friendliness Madame Verdurin was displaying towards this man, Forcheville, whom Odette had had the singular idea of bringing. A little ill at ease with Swann, she had asked when she arrived, "What do you think of my guest?" And he, realizing for the first time that Forcheville, whom he had known for a long time, might be attractive to a woman, and was a rather handsome man, had answered, "Disgusting." Of course, it did not occur to him to be jealous over Odette, but he did not feel as happy as usual, and when Brichot, having begun to tell the story of the Blanche de Castille's mother, who had been with Henry Plantagenet for years before she married him, tried to prompt Swann to ask him what happened next by saying to him, "Isn't that so, Monsieur Swann?" In the marital tone one adopts to make oneself understood by a peasant or instill courage in a soldier, Swann spoiled Brichot's effect to the fury of their hostess by answering that they must all please excuse him for being so uninterested in Blanche de Castille, but he had something to ask the painter. That afternoon, in fact, the painter had gone to see the show of a friend of Madame Verdurin's, an artist who had died recently, and Swann wanted to find out more from him, for he respected his taste. He wanted to find out if there really was even more in these last works than the virtuosity that was already so astounding in the earlier ones. In that respect, it was extraordinary, but it didn't seem to me to be an art that was, as they say, all that elevated, said Swann, smiling. "Elevated to the height of an institution," interrupted Cottard, lifting his arms with a mock gravity. The whole table burst out laughing. "Didn't I tell you? He won't allow anyone to be serious," said Madame Verdurin to Forcheville. "Just when you least expect it, he comes out with a pun." But she noticed that Swann alone had not brightened up. What was more, he was not very pleased that Cottard had made fun of him in front of Forcheville. But the painter, instead of answering Swann in an interesting way, which he probably would have done if he had been alone with him, preferred to win the admiration of the guests by contributing a little set piece on the skill of the deceased master. "I went up to one of them," he said, "just to see how it was done. I stuck my nose into it. Well, absolute truth, impossible to say whether it was done with glue or rubies or soap or sunshine or leaven or bronze or caca." "And 1 makes 12, cried the doctor, too late, so that no one understood his interruption. "The thing looked as though it were made with nothing at all," the painter went on. "Absolutely no way of discovering the trick, any more than the Night Watch or the Regents, and the brushwork is even stronger than Rembrandt's or Hall's. It's got everything in it to know, I swear." And just as singers who have reached the highest note they can sing continue in falsetto softly, he confined himself to murmuring and smiling, as if in fact the painting had been absurdly beautiful. "It smells good. It goes to your head. It takes your breath away. It tickles you, and you haven't a hope of knowing what it's made with. It's some kind of sorcery. It's a trick. It's a miracle." Bursting into full laughter. "It's dishonest!" And stopping, gravely lifting his head, adopting a deep bass tone, which he tried to make harmonious, he added, "And it's so sincere." That's where I'm stopping for tonight, on page 264.